So we're going to start with some introductions, and we're going to have some dialogue while we're going through the presentation. In my learning, and it was all online, and so dialogue was really important. It's a little bit different than discussion. So what we were asked to do was to suspend our judgments and assumptions whenever we're learning something new and talking with each other about it online. Use exploratory language like perhaps and maybe. I use perhaps in my language now, so more than I've ever used that word. But just to give others room and space to have their own thoughts and their own feelings about what's going on. We want to value the contributions of others and speak really when you're moved to speak, and also don't be afraid to leave space in between so that we can really be thoughtful about what we're saying. So, another thing we were asked to do was to notice any reactions within ourselves when others are talking and when information is coming in. If something hits you and gives you kind of a reaction, just to notice that those things are happening. So, we're going to start with introductions, and we're just going to give your name, where you're from, how you know me. Also, if you work with children or have worked with children in any capacity, you can throw that in there too. And I'm going to ask Chester to introduce himself in the traditional indigenous way, because one of the things that we talk a lot about in our program was our connection to place, where we are from and where we live, and our connection to our ancestors. And that's traditionally how indigenous people introduce themselves. So, my name is April Aurora Brown, and I was born in Dallas and raised here in Denton County. And my connection to me is very complicated. Chester. Oh, I'm also a Montessori teacher. And I own Morning Light Montessori.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I teach 3 to 6-year-olds.
Okay, great. See, it's complicated. I'm going to do both, like Navajo and English. So what I said was my nickname. I had a nickname, Indian name. Said that I can't share the real one, and that's the kid that ran fast. And then the first clan is my mother's clan. That's Red House. And then the second clan is my father's clan. That's the Water's Edge people. And then my grandfather and mom's side is the arms folded and armpit people. And then my paternal grandfather is the red streak in the forehead. And then after that, we describe kind of where we came from. So she le bahaslatay adet she niado adet she yahote e ade e Ruby do Jack Brown e ade the Kaya de do ado le wunnan jet hat khasi jindline to Frank Jones o yende e hota e kwebe be shitsui be shinala the linigi do she sana the linigi be e ade zanda shah. So I explained that Ruby and Jack were the matriarch of the land, and she had an older brother named Frank Jones, who was the medicine man in that whole area. So when we introduce ourselves that way, what ends up happening is the people in the area that are familiar with those things, they kind of get an idea of who you are and where you come from. And from that, we can make relations. And then how I'm related to this one, well, it's on the wall. We got married. It was no accident. Yeah. So we were kind of introduced to each other through a mutual friend, Glenn. It's all Glenn's fault.
Thank you.
So.
I have to. Oh, Chester's manning our camera for us today, so thank you, Chester. All right. Who are we starting with?
Whoever wants to go first.
Go ahead, Mom.
I am Linda Franklin. I was born in Ada, Oklahoma, and moved from Oklahoma to Texas and back to Oklahoma and back to Texas. So now I reside in Denton County. April is my daughter, my second daughter, And I taught elementary music, kindergarten through 5th grade for 31 years.
Thanks. Emo?
I'm Joanne McGivney. I was born in Wewoka, Oklahoma, lived on Meckasukie Street, so we had lots of Indian to begin with. Lived in Oklahoma, then Texas, then back to Oklahoma, back to Texas, back to Oklahoma, back to Texas, back to Texas, back to Oklahoma, and back again to the Dallas area. I mean, to the Dallas area, not again. Anyway, April is my number 2 granddaughter out of 4. I taught kindergarten in my home for 10 years, and then I taught 1st grade and 1st and kindergarten together, and then went into special education. So, long time of education.
Thank you.
My name is Stephanie Noble. I am from Austin. My family lives in Austin currently. And then when I went to college at UNT here in Denton, that's when I moved up here. And I've been here pretty much since 2012. And I don't plan on leaving because I love it. And I was a music ed major, so I did work with a lot of kids. And I currently work at a church, so I also work with a lot of kids. But mainly like just interacting with families and stuff like that, and friends that kids. I don't have any kids, but I'm married, and my husband and I work at our church together. And I and Aurora, we met, I guess, a month and a half ago.
I guess.
I was about a month and a half ago at the mechanics. And so we met at the mechanics waiting on our cars. So that's how I know.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. So, presentation, I've titled it Education as a Help to Life. And it's really, I'm going to walk you through my learning journey with the Institute of Educational Studies, or the TIES program. It's for my Master's of Education in Montessori Integrated Learning. Also including in here my focus area, which is nurturing the spirit of the child. And we're going to start out with a little bit of an icebreaker, so I need somebody who is willing to write. Anyone? We only have an hour here. Just jump up there. Come on, Stephanie.
You want me to write?
Yes, thank you.
And
What's that?
You want me just to write?
So there, see the markers over there, pick a
Yes.
color, and we're gonna use this here. What we're gonna answer is, what is your greatest hope for children as adults? So as children are growing, what do you hope for them in their life and in their being? And just kind of shout out some words, and Stephanie will write them down, words or phrases.
that they become strong Christian adults.
Okay, strong Christian adults.
I think kind.
Kind. Kind is a great one. Let's hope that our children are kind.
Find their inner strength.
Find their inner strength. We're gonna get deep there today. I love it.
Find and focus as a career the thing that interests them the most.
Okay. I like it. She's paraphrasing as passion in the job. That's great.
I think to become learners.
To be a learner. Anything else? If my children grow up to be strong Christian adults, they're kind, have inner strength, passion in their job, or find their passion in their job, and they're a learner, they're happy, whole, and complete. Are we good with that? You want to add anything else?
Well, I would hope they would be happy.
Happy? Happy is good. I would like to add that they have a good sense of discernment, good judgment. They can make some good decisions.
Just being able to make decisions.
Being able to make decisions. Thinking for yourself.
Spell it correctly? Fix it.
It's okay. We're not judging on spelling. Trust me, I am the world's worst speller, so it's all right. too bad, English is not phonetic. So let's, okay, thank you very much, and we can just kind of, we're gonna hang on to this list here, and it's gonna come back up in a little bit later. But I appreciate, just wanted to kind of get the words flowing and the thoughts flowing so that we can have some dialogue and it's not me just talking because there's lots of words. So just to start out, education as a help to life. Maria Montessori said that that's what education should be, and I'm just going to read, a lot of these quotes are going to come up and I'm going to read them. This is education, understood as a help to life, an education from birth, which feeds peaceful resolution and unites all in a common aim, attracting them as to a single center. Mothers, fathers, politicians, all must combine in their respect and help for this delicate work of formation, which the little child carries on in the depth of a profound psychological mystery, under the tutelage of an inner guide. This is the bright new hope for mankind. So there's a lot of words here, and we're really going to kind of dig into things like the delicate work of formation, the profound psychological mystery, and the inner guide. She also said, to aid life, leaving it free, however, to unfold itself, that is the basic task of the educator. So Maria Montessori, if you didn't already know, was the creator of the Montessori method. She was a scientist, a philosopher, a psychologist. She is kind of a hero of mine, an amazing woman way before her time, in my opinion. So in order to be an aid to life, for education to be an aid to life, perhaps we should take a look at what life is. We'll start with how it works and why. Maria Montessori also said that observation has been carried out by us with a view of discovering what are the laws of life. Because if we wish to help life, the first thing we must do is to know the laws governing life. So, as our first dialogue question, what do you think is a defining characteristic of life? What would you consider to be a defining characteristic of life? How do you know something is alive?
It breathes.
It breathes.
Their functions, their movement.
Movement. This is actually one of the works that we do in the classroom with the children. It's living and non-living for the 3 and 6-year-olds that I teach, and I ask them the same question: what's the difference? How do you know that this animal is alive?
It grows.
It grows. It breathes.
Reproduces.
It reproduces. So those are all some characteristics of life. So to answer this question and look really at the characteristics of the life system, like you said, there's movement in there, and I'm going to pull from The System's View of Life by Friedrich Capra and Pierluigi Luisi. And they looked at the whole system. They said when you look at life, it's not localized. You can't say here's where life resides, but it's a global property, and it's a system. He also refers back to Chilean biologists Humberto Maturana and Francisco Varela, which we did a lot of studying with them as well. And they are well known for their autopoiesis theory, and saying that basically a living system is an autopoietic system. And autopoiesis, from just looking at the etymology, auto means self and poiesis is making. So an autopoietic system is a self-creating system. And we're going to take a little bit of a closer look at that. This is the trilogy of life that Capra, who wrote The System's View of Life, had in his book. And he said that you can't really just say it's an autopoietic system or an organism, but it's also the organism's environment and cognition. And we're going to look into the environment and the autopoietic organism a little closer. So, according to Capra, an autopoietic unit can be defined as a system capable of sustaining itself due to a network of reactions. Thank you. Wow. I've read that like 3 times today and never had a problem, and just now I did. A network of reactions which continuously regenerate the components, and this from within a boundary of its own making. He said the living organism is characterized by biological autonomy, but at the same time it's very strictly dependent upon the external medium for its survival. So if it is a living system, then it's capable of sustaining itself by continuously recreating itself. But it has to do that by relating to the environment, by bringing something in from the environment. Does that make sense? Have you ever heard of autopoietic before? So this was one of the new words that I really loved, and it's just fun to say. Poiesis, too, in the Greek is also the same root word as poetry. So it's self-poetic in a way. It's autopoietic. So the second piece of that, though, is structural coupling. And according to the theory of autopoiesis, a living system relates to its environment structurally. That is, through recurrent interactions, each of which triggers structural changes in the system. So, just to give you a picture, this is a picture that Capra put in his book of an autopoietic system. So we have the input coming in from the environment into the bounded system, and the system itself determines how it's going to change that input and assemble it back into the self, if you will. Does that make sense? So it's a self-creating system. So I want to go back to this question here. Looking at this system, just at the basis of autopoiesis, you can see how the physiological system works. And, you know, one of the things that stood out to me in learning about autopoiesis is that this organism, if it's a fly or a tree or a single-cell organism or a human being, always stays itself. It determines the changes that it determines that happen, that come in, are done because of how the system, what the system is to begin with, right? So like if I eat a piece of broccoli, I'm not going to turn into a piece of broccoli, right? I maintain who I am, and I take whatever I brought in and use it to recreate my cells, right? Physiologically. So a little bit of a dialogue question. What stands out to you in this system? And let me rephrase that. How else can you see this system as being useful other than physiological? Can you relate it to any other aspect other than physiological?
Education.
Okay, how would you do that?
I
What do you mean?
put input into the system, what's given to the child, the student, how, and then how that information is, my words are leaving me, how it's used to develop mentally, emotionally, physically.
Yep. Absolutely.
Cognitive,
Education.
emotionally, mentally.
Right, so this is kind of a system of education, right? You could kind of put education as I wonder if that makes education a living system. Interesting. So take a step back a little bit and go back to the beginning of my studies. And when we started with the universe story. In fact, we started with The Journey of the Universe by Brian Swim, and how life is connected and studying how everything is connected together. And Brian Swim, who teaches evolutionary cosmology in California, says the essence of the universe story is this: the stars are our ancestors. Out of them, everything comes forth. And Jiddu Krishnamurti, who is an Indian philosopher and speaker and writer, said, we must realize that we are not only conditioned by the environment, but we are the environment. We are not something apart from it. So a big part of my learning was founded on this, it's not really a concept, but this scientific observation that if you go back to the very beginning, all of the elements that were created And when the stars exploded and came back together and did their thing, eventually came down to the earth being created and the plants and the animals and us. And so it started scientifically from an evolutionary cosmological point of view. It started from just those elements, and everything else was created from that element. So if you look at it in that way, the stars are our ancestors. We came from them. And I found it interesting, who said this? Krishnamurti also said that in many cultures throughout history, humans intuited that they descended from the stars even before they had any empirical evidence from science that our bodies were formed by the elements forged by the stars. When I was going through this learning, a lot of what I was able to read brought up things like intuition. We use our intuition or passion or feelings and experience, and all of these kinds of things came up in my process of education, which I found to be deeply meaningful and helpful, because I really connected to the information because it had meaning to me. And so even to just hear that we're considering the ancient cultures that intuited something spoke to me. Let's see, Thomas Berry, who is a cultural historian and self-proclaimed geologian, said, "The difficulty is that with the rise of modern sciences, we began to think of the universe as a collection of objects rather than a communion of subjects." Now this is one that we had a lot of dialogue over, and I'd like to ask you a dialogue question on this quote. What do you think would change if we all saw the universe as a communion of subjects? If our point of view collectively could change from being a collection of objects to a communion of subjects, what do you think would change in our world?
I think first of all, there's like an image that comes to my brain, like when we think about our bodies, like a lot of times we think about them really disjointed. So we think about, oh, we have a brain doctor, and you have a knee doctor, and you have a foot doctor, and you have a whatever, all these different like doctors. You have a digestive tract doctor, you have a gynecologist, you have all these things. And so I think that leads to just like I don't know, just undervaluing how all of the processes work together and need or like reliant on one another.
Right.
I think that if like basing off this quote, like what they're hoping for is that if people recognize, and with like creation and everything, if they recognize their dependence and care for one another, there would be a lot more kindness and care,
Right.
and compassion, and but yeah, I think that's where I would see. It's like you have to see them. If you see them functioning together, then that would lead to a care for them as well. So.
Any other thoughts?
I think maybe if we considered the universe being someone we could communicate with
Oh, yeah.
instead of objects,
Right.
but actually had that two-way communication, that attitudes might be a little bit different toward nature and building up of big factories
Right.
and pollution, so forth.
That reminds me of the indigenous, well, specifically reminds me of my husband and his stories of when he was a child getting in trouble for talking to the trees. Because he would have conversations with the animals and the trees, and at his school, that was not okay. Right?
Yes, it was a Christian school.
Okay.
I used to wonder what the stars could tell us, if they could actually speak to us and we could, actually have a conversation. What could they tell us?
Wow. What could they tell us? That's a neat thought. Because they've been there forever. Like, literally. That's a neat thought. Maria Montessori said, "We shall walk together on this path of life, for all things are a part of the universe and are connected with each other to form one whole unity." So all of this science, by the way, that we studied from Thomas Berry and Brian Swim and Friedrich Capra and Varela and Maturana, all came after Montessori. Most of them. I have to actually check that fact before I make that statement, but I know that her 150th birthday is coming up in August, and I'm pretty sure none of those people are that old. So, we'll move on to life as education. So let's see. Oh, this was one of my favorite authors. In Ecological Literacy, it's a book that's a conglomeration of a bunch of different essays, and one of the essays was Indian Pedagogy, a look at traditional California Indian teachings by Malcolm Margolin. And it was really hard for me to not pick all of his quotes. He said, "Knowledge is not just something to be stored and talked about. It's something to be lived. Knowledge, apart from experience, cannot be trusted and won't last." When you teach someone something, you've robbed the person of the experience of learning it. You need to be cautious before you take that experience away from someone else.
If you haven't had the experience, you really haven't, I can't think of my word. You haven't
Internalized.
internalized it, thank you.
Yeah,
You haven't.
right, exactly. You haven't internalized it. So if you're standing up here lecturing and just feeding information to people, or to children especially, instead of having them experience it, there's something that's going to be missing. They're not getting the whole thing. I think of it like, I remember people trying to explain to me, especially when I found out I was pregnant, what it was like to be pregnant and have a baby. And you just don't get it until you've done it. And that's one of the things that reminds me of.
I had a time convincing my 5th grade boys especially, but 5th graders in general, when I told them that we were going to the opera, well, they didn't want to go to the opera. That was horrible. They didn't like that music. They, but once they got there and experienced it, it was a whole different process.
Right.
And then they wanted to hear more of it or see more of it. And the year that I spending more time on classical composers, they became more interested in them and actually started having favorites,
Yeah.
where they didn't want to listen to it at all to
Right.
begin with. So the experience is very important.
Absolutely. One of the other quotes that he gave that I just really love is, "The world contains things that we need to know that are too important to be left solely to human beings. And these essential lessons are embedded in the animals, plants, mountains, and rivers around us." So Mario Montessori Jr., because the next quote, the last quote on this page, was Maria Montessori's grandson. And he wrote this book, Education for Human Development, Understanding Montessori. And he said, "Humans are not born with pre-established behavior patterns." So not like animals, like horses, when they're just born and they get up and start running almost right away. We're not born with that pre-established knowing what to do and how to do it. But with the ability to form them during youth. We do this through our personal experiences and our interactions with our environment. So it takes us a whole another section. Our childhood is elongated, unlike most animals, because we don't have that automatic, oh, this is how we're supposed to live. And so we depend on our experiences and our interactions with the environment to do that. Oh, there was something else before. So sometimes I lose my thing here. I know I had to share. This is it. So think of an experience that you have had in your life that taught you something that you have carried with you ever since then and that you've used in your life. So take a minute to just think about an experience. It could be recent, it could be a long time ago, but something that taught you something that you've carried with you. And then if someone would like to share their story, I'm not gonna look at anybody.
I think
Life itself is an experience.
It is.
when I was younger, involved in ceremonies, learning about the connection to the Mother Earth and the Father Sky, and this new idea about God, about Jesus and the Holy Spirit, and how that all kind of integrated. And I think when I was younger, I was told that my mind and my body, my spirit, my emotions, my feelings all have to be pretty much aligned before I do anything in reference to reaching out to the universe. Because if I had a negative feeling against somebody in that room, and then after a while later someone throws out the cedar and says, "Bless yourself," guess what I just blessed myself with? And then they bless themselves with that same energy. So I had to learn how to quiet the mind and quiet my emotions and just be, kind of flow, just watch the flow of what's happening. And from that day on, that's pretty much all this has been, is flowing with how that great creator works, because we don't really know how it works. I mean, a year and a half ago, I couldn't have said I would be in this house and that I would be a house owner. I was nowhere near that. A year ago, I wouldn't know that I was working, where I'd be working. I had no clue. Because you kind of have to trust, but you can't really like nail it down. You kind of have to flow. And I think that I carry that with me ever since those experiences in ceremony. And the funny thing about the indigenous cultures is when they brought over the cross, they brought over the idea of God, the Holy Spirit, and Jesus. And when we became Christian, the church, the people in the church thought we replaced our gods. We just added them, because this way works for us. The connection to the Mother Earth, the Father Sky, and all those things. We just put different names on it for them. So that's another lesson, because it's her day. And if you want to learn more, give me a call.
Thank you. So, Chester, what I hear you saying is that you identify a lot with what I've been learning and the connection to creation and experience as a teacher. In fact, it's one of the things we talked about was that the indigenous people, it was actually an experience of mine where when I went up to the reservation, when I first started going up there, and I would ask questions and wanted to learn things, and they refused to tell me. And it took me a while before I figured out that they're not telling me because that would be robbing me. It was actually when I read that quote, they'd be robbing me of the experience. And I had to actually go through certain things and learn it by experiencing it. They weren't just going to tell me. And it also makes me think about the classroom, where how many times have I watched a child struggle with, a work and just gone, look here, this is how you do it, which I've completely now robbed them of the experience of figuring it out on their own. Anybody else have a story they'd like to share? No? Come on. All right. Well, we all have stories like that where something has happened to us, we've experienced something, and it's really given us a profound sense of, wow, this is, something I'm going to carry with me for the rest of my life. It reminds me of something, it teaches me something. And so that brings me into The Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell. Anybody heard of this? No? Excellent. It's brand new to you. Joseph Campbell did a lot of research on story. He researched religions and myths and movies and stories, what am I trying to say, literature, books, that's what I was trying to say. And he found that when he looked at all of these things, that there was a pattern. And so this is a modified version of the hero's journey, which is what he calls it. And a lot of times when you look at this online, or when you research it a little bit, they will relate it to Star Wars or The Matrix, because you can really see very clearly the pattern. And you know, which starts with a call to adventure, and we leave the known for the unknown, and we go through this death and rebirth process while we're fighting our dragons. And then atonement, we get, you know, this aha, and we return back, and it starts all over again. So this is kind of the story that he found that was throughout all the stories. And if you look at it, it's really a process of our life, that we go through this process all the time. One of the movie that we watched was Finding Joe, which if you're ever interested in watching, it's a great documentary. We found it on Amazon, through the Gaia channel, I think. And David Miller, who works at the intersections of religions and mythologies, literature and theory, psychology and psychoanalysts, he said, "It is better to have a story to look through life than an explanation. The reason for that is that the story is richer." So indigenous cultures, if they could not teach through experience, they would teach through story. And for Maria Montessori, she uses the story of creation, the story of the universe, and evolution from the very beginning all the way till humanity, to kind of underline, especially the older ages, their entire curriculum. So right now, today, our traditional schools have all of the subjects separated, right? You go to math class, you go to a reading class, you go to a history class, but Montessori gave the story of the universe as the foundation, because from that you can teach everything. You can teach where language came from, you can teach math, you can teach philosophy, history, everything comes from that. So she would open her classroom, or open the year, with this amazing story about how everything comes to be, and then that's kind of where they go from there to integrate all of the subjects. Anybody heard of Sir Ken Robinson? Oh. Sir Ken Robinson, if you have not seen his YouTube presentation, it's really great. He is a speaker on education and the arts. Have you ever seen it? He's a speaker on education and the arts, and he said, in this movie, Finding Joe, he said, "We have to find a way of reflecting on those experiences we've had that engaged us, and where we became lost and totally absorbed in them." So, story is a really important part of education and learning. When we put things in story form, it's almost as good as experiencing it, if you can't experience it, in my opinion. How do you think, in what ways do you think that story might be richer than an explanation? Any thoughts on that?
Story's using your imagination. So if your imagination is engaged, they're having to put themselves into the story in a lot of ways. You're helping them put themselves in the story.
Ah,
And so it's like a way of teaching. It's like, I don't want to just regurgitate information to you, or tell you information so you can just regurgitate it back to me. I want you to know it better. And so if you tell it in a story, it engages a lot more senses than just like, oh, just absorb information.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So Brene Brown, do you know who that is? She's an author, and she's actually a researcher and storyteller. And she does a lot of research on psychological things like shame and perfectionism and things like that. She's really fun to listen to as well. And she said our brain has to have a story. So when we get into a state of heightened emotion, we have to tell ourselves a story, whether it's true or not. In order to get out of that state of fight or flight, right, we have to have a story to move forward, because we got to know where to go, what's safe. And so we'll make stuff up if we have to, so that we can get out of that state and move forward. So story is centrally important to our psychic life. One of the other things that we learned from the hero's journey is following your bliss. Joseph Campbell said that follow your bliss and the universe will open doors for you where there were only walls. Maria Montessori and Thomas Berry referred to this as our great work. And for me, during this last year and a half, following my bliss has been an amazing journey, and trusting that this process works and that it, just leaning into it has caused me to be here where my classroom is ready and we're up and running and we're ready for students, and that is something that's been a dream of mine for a while. So that is my great work. For me, it's acknowledging and nurturing the spirit of the child within education, and especially at this age. So that's been a pretty amazing thing. So that brings us into my focus area of spirituality. For me, it was really important, just to give you a little bit of background. Growing up, I did not like school. School was not, I know that's a real shocker to you. Mom can attest. Because it lacked meaning. I didn't make any sense. How many times did I come home and go, why do I have to do this? This doesn't make any sense to me. There's no reason for it. And I was starving spiritually in school. I was not making any connections. I was not making connections to other students. I was not making connections to myself or the information. Which is probably why I have the passion that I do about making sure that children are nurtured. Thomas Berry said in his book, The Great Work, the spiritual and the physical are two dimensions of a single reality. That is the universe itself. So the universe itself is not only a physical thing, right? It has a spiritual aspect to it. And in a lot of the readings that we did, they talk about that the universe has compassion, that there's evidence in nature of compassion and love, that there is a spiritual side to it. Capra, in the systems view, said, spiritual experience is an experience of aliveness of mind and body as a unity. Moreover, this experience of unity transcends not only the separation of mind and body, but also the separation of self and world. So from a scientist's perspective, spiritual experience is one of aliveness and of connection, of unity of mind and body and self and the world. Now, Miss Brene Brown, she said in Rising Strong, actually I have to tell you that this Rising Strong as a spiritual practice is a lecture that I'm still listening to. I just started listening to it this week, and it's fit so well in here that I just kind of had to throw it in here. But she said her definition of spirituality when she talks about spirituality is recognizing and celebrating that we are inextricably connected to one another by a power greater than all of us, and that our connection to that power and to one another is grounded in love and belonging. She believes that love and belonging has to be there, or it's not really a spiritual experience. She said that she doesn't consider a connection with other people over hatred or fear as being a spiritual experience, which is something I have to think about. I think maybe it is a spiritual experience, but it's just not one that I want. It's just a different kind. So
It's not the same energy.
it's not the same energy, is it? It's not, yeah. And I guess hatred and, well, I guess you can be connected in those things, but yeah, it's not what I normally think of as connection. So just something to
Not a
think about.
healthy connection.
It's not a healthy connection, there you go. It's not helpful. I feel like that's gonna not end in growth, but maybe death.
But death.
So
But it's really not a connection. Hatred isn't.
if we're connected in hatred, that's
It's
what
like
she
you're
was
both like
saying.
equal, it's like you're both hating something.
Right.
That's what she's talking about. So
Right.
you can be connected, it's just not gonna lead to the prospering of those two individuals.
Right.
It'll lead to them becoming
or that are angry, or hateful, or whatever.
Right, yeah, it's just gonna lead down that road some more, which eventually is gonna end up in disconnection, right? That's my thought too. That's how I felt about it. But we're gonna get more specifically, what does spirituality look like in children? And Children's Spirituality and Why It Matters by Rebecca Nye. She says, children's spirituality is an initially natural capacity for awareness of the sacred quality of life experiences. So children are naturally aware of sacred quality of life experiences. This awareness can be conscious or unconscious and sometimes fluctuates between both, but in both cases can affect actions, feelings, and thoughts. In childhood, spirituality is especially about being attracted towards being in relation, responding to a call to relate to more than just me, i.e. others, God, creation, or to a deeper inner sense of self. This encounter with transcendence can happen in specific experiences or moments, as well as through imaginative or creative activity, thoughts, and meaning making. So spirituality shows up in children as awe and wonder, amazement at the mystery and discovery of every little thing.
And I think of your mother when she was 2, 3, chasing the birds in the trees. Chasing all of the yard, chasing the birds.
Do you remember chasing the birds, Mom? No. Well, that's actually one of our next questions. So, go ahead. Go get it, or you can leave it.
My phone,
Yes, do you want to go get it?
my purse.
Just let it ring.
Okay. The child nourishes and develops his human qualities first by this unconscious absorption, and then by his activities directed to outward things. He constructs himself, he forms his characteristics by nurturing his spirit. This is Maria Montessori in The Formation of Man, and she said that in her theory, and talks about child development, that when a baby is first born, when a child is born, they have what she calls an absorbent mind. They just are absorbing everything, almost like just osmosis, just sponges, right? And this actually absorbent mind lasts for the first several years. So, but once they start to have mobility, then their interaction with their environment, that's how they start learning, right? So they kind of gradually go from this sponge to this more of an autopoietic, taking from the environment physically. So he constructs himself, and he constructs himself, and the child forms their characteristics by nurturing their spirit. So my question is, if the child nurtures their own spirit, think about what are some of the things that the child might do, and see if you can remember as a child nurturing your own spirit, and what is something that you did as a young child, say 6 or younger, you can remember that young, if not 8, 9, whatever, or however far back you can remember. What did you do to nurture your spirit? Well, see, Mimo already answered that she remembers Mom.
But I probably was singing as I was chasing those birds.
Probably she was.
So singing is
Singing.
something that you would do.
It was something that I did frequently. Almost as much as your niece did when she was in school and the teacher would say, she sings all the time. This was in kindergarten, I remember. She would just be singing, and not out loud, I mean, not loudly, just to herself.
Did you make up your own songs?
Yes, absolutely.
You too?
Yeah, I created stories in my head, so my siblings and I would act out these stories like this morning and things that we read or whatever, but we would just pretend to be this person and they be my little sister, and which they were, so it wasn't that creative. But like we would go outside, we'd be building things, we would be imagining like that we were making a soup, but it was dirt and sticks and things, and so it was like we're cooking, but we're not really cooking. So we did a lot of that.
A lot of pretending and
A lot of
experiencing.
Playing school,
You're playing school.
a lot of playing
Just do a lot of playing. So isn't that funny? We play school and then we go to school and then we
Yeah.
play school.
I was at school all the time, I gathered up all of them, they were good kids, and I was the teacher.
So, John Bradford said in Caring for the Whole Child about spiritual development, he said, human spirituality describes the well-being and interrelatedness of the emotional, cognitive, and intuitive self, which includes sensitivity to the transcendent. It is developed through love and affection, security, new experiences, one being external, play and exploration, and two being internal, opportunities for stillness, reflection, awe, and wonder, and also through praise and recognition. My story of remembering what I did as a child to nurture my spirit is I remember laying in the grass, especially in the clover, and just looking for four-leaf clovers or ladybugs, or laying on my back and watching the clouds and making pictures and shapes out of the clouds. Did a lot of that. A lot of stillness and reflection, awe and wonder, and searching for bugs. Climbing trees. Did a lot of climbing trees and chasing butterflies too. So all of those things that we did as a child helped us to nurture our spirit.
I enjoyed looking at night, especially in the summer. We slept outside even, and looking up to the stars and looking at the constellations and looking for meteors and just, the different formations that you could see. It really weren't constellations, but you could picture something and
Make pictures out
make
of it.
pictures out of
Make
it.
your own constellations. Do you remember being outside and chasing fireflies?
Absolutely.
Oh, yes, oh, yes.
I remember being
With the
down-
neighborhood kids.
Mhm. Yeah, we used to have fireflies out here. I haven't seen any since I moved back.
Haven't seen any in ages.
So, question that I had here is, I thought I reformed this question, so give me a minute. I originally formed it in a negative and I don't like that, so I'm gonna change it. How might, nope, I have to do it that way. If we are not nurturing the spirit of the child in the classroom or otherwise, how might that affect the pathway to this end, to this goal that we have for children? We are not nurturing the spirit of the child. How might that affect them being able to attain these things?
It could be a very negative response to not being nurtured positively. They could have difficulty with decision making, and they could be unkind to people, because a lot of times you need that self-awareness first.
Could prevent the development of any of those.
Yeah, if they're not reflective, and like if they are not learning as the little kids to be reflective of how their actions affect others, or how their actions affect themselves, or what their thoughts do, or what their thoughts lead to actions a lot of times, like what we think and what in our brain a lot of times comes out, then it won't lead to them becoming kind, or them wanting to be a learner and being happy ultimately, because they'll just end up being frustrated or discouraged, or just a lot of different things.
If they're insecure, they're not gonna have inner strength, they're not gonna be happy, they're not gonna make good judgments.
All of these things get affected. All of them get touched. So I heard a lot of that self-awareness being a really important thing, and that reflectiveness. And we're going to talk about that because one of the questions I asked in my research is, what can I do as a Montessori guide to nurture the spirit of the child in that classroom? At this age that I teach, which is 3 to 6, they're just becoming aware of themselves. And they're also just they're just getting into that space of self-discipline. So But so as a guide, I get them right at that space, right when their awareness is first coming online. And so I was thinking to myself, there's got to be something I can do. I gotta be able to give them some kind of profound insight that will help them to, carry this through their whole life and end up, with all of these wonderful things that we wish for them. Thomas Berry said, "The beginning of wisdom in any human activity is a certain reverence before the primordial mystery of existence. For the world about us is a fearsome mode of being." And for me, I'm going to rephrase this quote, and I feel like what he's saying is that education starts with a spiritual connection to God, to nature, and to the process of life, and to others. So how can I nurture this spirit? How can I give them this foundation of connection? What is it that I can do, in the classroom to help with this? Well, as we've talked about with childhood spirituality, they're already there, right? They already automatically are connected to nature, to God, to themselves. I mean, they're just in awe and wonder of everything. And so my thought was, well, I want them to keep that. Is there something we can do to help them hold on to that through their life? And so that's what I went in search of and trying to find. So considering then the process of autopoiesis and structural coupling, knowing that the child is taking from their environment, they're using the things from their environment to teach themselves, really. They're experimenting, they're learning from their hands-on experiences and their movement within, especially the classroom environment and in nature, and at home, wherever they go, right? They've always got their hands on everything. I'm thinking, well, what kind of influence do I really have over the spirituality of these little children? And two things came up. Well, one, I have control over the environment in the classroom, right? And I have some control over the environment outside. Not a whole lot, but, I have some over what I put out there. And so I can control the environment. I can give them opportunities to develop themselves intellectually, academically, physically, emotionally. I can give them some tools and some things to work with so that they can do that. And then the second thing that I can do is I have control over me. I have control over my actions, my habits, my own spirit. And this was a concept that Maria Montessori had said many times in my earlier training that came up, and it's also a concept that my faculty mentor had suggested to me, and I thought, well, it's just not enough. It's just not enough for me. I'm going to do something. And so I did. I researched activities I can do for children, and I have a peace curriculum that I go through, and I continue to do my research. And what I found was, well, let me walk you through it. First of all, self-awareness, which is what you already said, is definitely the first step. And I found that this is the big piece. This coming online for them means I also need to have a level of self-awareness. I need to work on making sure I'm aware of who I am so that I can be aware of who they are, right? So Krishnamurti said, self-knowledge is the beginning of freedom, and it is only when we know ourselves that we can bring about order and peace. He said, to understand ourselves, we must be aware of our relationship, not only with people, but also with property, with ideas, and with nature. So as a Montessori guide, really the biggest task that I have is to nurture that self-awareness as it comes online. So giving them opportunities to be self-reflective. Maria Montessori, in our Montessori training, we do something called the silence game, where it's amazing how quietly the children will sit as a game, as something that they want to do, not just because we're trying to make them get quiet when we follow that process. So In order to have self-awareness, we have to have observation. We have to be able to observe ourselves, kind of take ourselves back a little bit and observe ourselves. So in my learning in this last year and a half, we did some nature observations where we were sent to go outside and observe nature. And I actually took a mindfulness class as part of my focus area studies, which was amazing. I have been in the habit of meditating for about an hour every morning, and have been doing that for about a year. But when I took this mindfulness class, it shifted a lot for me. We did some mindfulness of body, of eating, of some habits, of emotions, of thoughts, the thoughts that were coming in and out. So we did the mindfulness training, and then we learned this neurophenomenological process. Neurophenomenology, other than being a great word to say, is a scientific process of observing and recording experience, because Varela said that first-person experience should be important, that it should be included. We all grew up in a time where when you wrote an academic paper or you did a scientific, study or whatever, you did it in third person and you took your experience out of it. It wasn't allowed to be in it, right? And so they said that there's a way where you can put it in there. And so I did a neurophenomenological study. I did a research project and looked at third person perspective and first person perspective. And one of the things that I really liked about this study is that Varela puts in this suspend, redirect, and let go process. He was also he was Buddhist, and he did a lot of meditation and studied with monks. He actually brought a lot of neurological studies in, like hooked monks up to, brain mapping, and did all kinds of fun things like that to study some of this. And I really appreciated that process of suspending my judgments and opinions and assumptions, watching what thoughts and emotions were coming in, and instead of looking necessarily right at the thought or the emotion that came in, redirecting myself to the process of what was going on, and then letting it go and starting over, suspending, redirecting, and letting go. And that process, when you practice it, really becomes eye-opening. Talk about some self-awareness. This is a psyche system map. I created this. I didn't create the map itself. I created the topics, how I put it together. So the frame of the map, the framework of the map was actually something that was given to me during my studies by Marcia Snow, and I took it and kind of created my own thought process with it. It's supposed to be a natural map. Think of these as spheres, a three-dimensional, moving and revolving kind of a thing, if you will. And this, so this is the matrix. This is the food chain. This is the boundary. The autopoietic unit or system is within a boundary, so this is the boundary. Our unifying, ordering, guiding principle is here. These partners work together. This is our growth point, and this is our stability point. So I'm not going to get too detailed into it, but what this did for me, this was something that was birthed through me. Like when I started to put this together, I couldn't do anything else. And the energy and the emotion that came out of me as I was processing this was sometimes even uncomfortable. It was very intense for me. And in fact, the food chains I've updated since I first created this just this week. And I sat and really was in some discomfort as I was coming through this. But what this has done for me is it's helped me in my own self-awareness and my observation of myself. Because as information comes into my psyche, into my spirit, it goes through and it hits, my thoughts and my emotions, and I can pull back and observe what's going on. And I know that it's going to go through that process of making meaning, telling a story, right? And I get to choose that because I'm an autopoietic unit who has boundaries, So I can choose, first of all, what information comes in and what information doesn't, to an extent, right? Because some information is just going to come in anyway. but I can choose what I let in and how it affects me, you know. The more that I found, the more that I go through this process, the more I observe this process and I'm aware of it, the stronger my boundaries are, and the more control I have over my thoughts and emotions and how I react and how I allow that information to change me. And in effect, once I come in, right, some new information comes in, I'm going to pull from my memory to see if I can associate it with anything. I'm going to create a story. I'm going to have some thoughts and emotions about it. I'm going to change it. It's going to change. I'm going to allow it to change me. I stay the same. My soul is still me. But I'm going to make some shifts and changes so that I can grow. And then I'm going to, through my will and desire, I'm going to change my actions and my habits or whatever, my beliefs. It could be, you know, depending on what the information is. And which then will change my environment. Right, because I have an effect on my environment, and my environment has an effect on me. We create each other. So this is just kind of, this was super huge for me, especially as a highly sensitive person. It just seemed to be a tool that helped me understand that there was something going on, especially when I'm going through changes and transitions. So when we started by looking at a book called Transitions. I took a pre-class before I started so I could kind of get used to how this online learning thing works. And it talked about transitions. And the first transitions always begin with an ending. And according to this book by William Bridges, he said that you have to let go of whatever the old information that you were using has to be gone first before the new information can really take hold and be integrated. So a lot of times that means that suspension of judgments, that suspension of beliefs or assumptions or whatever, right? One of the questions that I had here was, if we're hanging on to the ending of something, if something has changed in our life and we hang on to that ending, what do you think happens if we can't let that go? Any thoughts or ideas on that?
You don't move on.
Right, it's hard to move on.
Like you're kind of stagnant because you're holding on to something that's already passing away or leaving.
Right, stagnate, hard to move on. Have you ever gone through a transition and you just are forced to move on, like you have to keep moving in your life anyway? I don't know about you, but for me, it'll come back up. Even if I thought I put it down, if I didn't really, it's going to come back up. And I'm going to have to revisit it again. So that was something that they talked about in there. But the real thing that I want to focus on with change is the neutral zone. Because after, whether we let go of the ending or not, we're going to go into this neutral zone area, which is basically a whole lot of chaos. When new information comes in, or something happens to us that's new, especially if we can't pull from our memory and go, oh, I know what this is, you know, and relate to it, then we're going to go into this space of confusion, not knowing what's going on, total chaos, very comfortable, right? We love this? No. No, I don't know very many people that like that space. So it's really, really uncomfortable. It's a lot of discomfort. So what I've learned through all of this process, because there was a lot of change and processing and just transitioning going on during this whole year, is that observing and trusting the process is really important. Because when there's these things called negative and positive feedback loops. A negative feedback loop is a regulator like your air conditioning, and a positive feedback loop is like the microphone and amplifier. You know how it makes that squeaky noise? So in nature, when there's chaos, which by the way, chaos is the creative force, it's where everything was created from chaos. So when the negative feedback loops and the positive feedback loops start, well here, so I'll read this. It's from the 7 Lessons of Chaos from Briggs. He said, when negative and positive feedback loops couple together, they create a new dynamic balance, a bifurcation point, where chaotic activity suddenly branches off into order. So suddenly, while your negative and positive feedback loops are just going at it, all of a sudden there comes this aha moment. There comes this bifurcation point that creates order, and everything just comes into order. It's a natural process. And so when we're sitting in that space, if we just sit with it in the discomfort for a while, that eventually, through most of the time little effort of our own, it'll naturally just come into order. The other thing that I learned from chaos is the butterfly effect. Anybody know what that is? You know what the butterfly effect is? No, you've never heard of the butterfly effect? Chester, what's the butterfly effect?
Butterfly effect is effect is when a butterfly on the other side of the world, let's say maybe Malaysia, flapped his wings maybe 3 weeks ago, and that's what brought that storm here yesterday.
Yeah. Well, so that's the theory. The butterfly effect is that when a butterfly flaps its wings, that small amount of energy, right, eventually builds up and creates this, you know, we had almost tornado weather last night and ended up in snow today. So somewhere there was a butterfly on the other side of the world that flapped its wings. So the butterfly effect basically taught me that even though I really want to do something profound to affect the spirit of these children, that really just me nurturing my own spirit and being who I am every day with them and being in relation with them is the butterfly flapping its wings that will eventually end up with a big effect. And that's kind of what spoke to me the most about that. I wanted to spend a little bit backing up to that neutral zone. This is a fun spot. So Briggs also said, professional creators, so artists and things like that, come to understand that in order to be creative, they need to give themselves to the sensations of knowing but not knowing, of inadequacy, uncertainty, awkwardness, awe, joy, horror, being out of control, and appreciating the non-linear, metamorphosing features of reality and their own thought processes, the many faces of creative chaos. So artists, great creators, understand that that process of transition comes with this really uncomfortable space of chaos, which can be up and down and all around, and they understand that, and they put themselves, they live there to create, because that's where the creativity is. And this was huge for me, especially when observing myself and the pieces that I didn't want to look at, and going through some trauma work that I went through, and being in that space of disequilibrium. Margaret Wheatley, who wrote the Leadership in the New Science, that's a point because all my books are over there, she said, it seems that the very experiences these children seek are the ones we avoid. Disequilibrium, novelty, loss of control, surprise. You know, they live in a space of mystery. They know they don't know, and they're okay with that. They love that mystery, and it puts them in a space of, wow, this is fun. And when I hit that disequilibrium, it's not what I think. It's not so fun. But after going through this and really trying to relate to and integrating this information, I came up with a mantra that I tell myself when I find myself thinking thoughts or saying things that indicate that I'm unhappy with this state of chaos that I'm in, is I say, and I love the creative chaos of that. So if I came home and I said, oh my gosh, the kids were bouncing off the walls today, then I would say, and I love the creative chaos of that. Because then my brain has to make up a story to make that true. And then it changes my perspective. So then I've changed my entire being. So the last part of that process is integrating the new. A living system produces itself. It will change in order to preserve that self. Change is prompted only when an organism decides that changing is the only way to maintain itself. How confusing does that sound? I'm only going to change if it means that I can keep myself. So, but she's actually talking, this is Margaret Wheatley again, and she, in this book, Leadership in the New Science, is talking about organizations and leadership, but it's so applicable to everything else because she's using the laws of nature. Whenever the environment offers new and different information, the system chooses whether to accept that provocation and respond. So the system chooses whether to accept and respond or not. I can no more force a child to change in the way that I want them to change than I can force a tree to be a rabbit. But I can influence, I can I can be an example, and I can guide to certain experiences. But that's all I can do. The change, them changing anything is up to them. And I think it's interesting that we only change when we think we're going to die. That's basically what this said, right? If something happens and, oh my gosh, I can't deal with this. And in fact, I'll read to you real quick this passage from her book. She says, in a dissipative structure, anything that disturbs the system plays a crucial role in helping itself organize into a new form of order. Whenever the environment offers new and different information, the system chooses whether to accept that provocation and respond. This new information might only be a small difference from the norm, but the system pays attention to this information. If the system pays attention to the information, it brings the information inside, and once inside the network, the information grows and changes. If the information becomes such a large disturbance that the system can no longer ignore it, then real change is at hand. At this moment, jarred by so much internal disturbance and far from equilibrium, the system will fall apart. In its current form, it cannot deal with the disturbance, so it dissolves. But this disintegration does not signal the death of the system. If a living system can maintain its identity, it can self-organize into a higher level of complexity, a new form of itself that can deal better with the present. So integrating new information really is all about accepting that change. And so this is my last slide. And throughout all of this year in studying in detail these natural laws and processes, I've got new understandings scientifically, intellectually, academically, in the natural laws, and also in communication and relations and relationships. I've gained a larger trust in myself and in my process, and a deeper love and compassion for myself and others. Spiritually, I've been nourished in greater ways and have a deeper awareness and connection with myself and others and God and nature. And then physically, my actions and habits have changed, and of course my environment has changed because of it. So this has been an incredibly powerful year for me, and I appreciate that you have come to listen to me talk about all of these things. And I want to leave you with a couple of quotes from Maria Montessori. She said, "It is not enough for the teacher to love the child. She must first love and understand the universe. She must prepare herself and truly work at it. The preparation for education is a study of oneself, and the preparation of a teacher who is to help life is more than a mere intellectual preparation. It is a preparation of character, a spiritual preparation."